Hello YouTube, Proxy here, and I'm finally getting around to doing my first impression of Dauntless Alpha. And, well, I kinda pretty much did everything that the alpha currently offers. As of right now, I'm currently maxing out my gear by farming Shroud, but other than that, there isn't much really left for me to do in game, despite only putting a week's worth of playtime in. But it's been one hell of a fun week. In fact, I wanted to do this first impression a lot sooner, but the game is pretty addictive. But before I continue, a generic disclaimer that Dauntless is still in development and everything discussed in this video is subject to change, and any gameplay shown or talked about does not fully represent the final product. This piece of content is just a first impression and not a full-fledged review, which is something that is reserved for a fully completed and released product. So let's kick off this video by explaining what Dauntless is. Dauntless is a co-op action RPG in which you battle ferocious behemoths, craft gear, and well, that's pretty much it. You kill stuff, craft stuff, and it's been somewhat labelled as the Western Monster Hunter. The first thing you'll be doing in Dauntless is making your character. You are presented with several options for potential parents, of various ethnicities, which then determines your generic look of your character, though honestly the actual impact of this currently seems quite limited, as you can pretty much undo most of this stuff via the next part of the character creator. And in this second part of the character creation you are given various slider options, but even with all these options I don't really see much of an impact made currently. As this game is still in an alpha stage, I'm just going to assume this is very much a work in progress still. After you have made your character, you will beat up your first behemoth, which is a fairly trivial affair. You can't really mess it up and there's not really a challenge to be had, it's more of an introduction of what to expect. I think this was a missed opportunity, to be quite honest. I would have loved to see my freshly made character to be thrown against some kind of endgame behemoth which you ultimately can't kill, but in return giving you a taste for the later endgame content and mechanics. Still, the way it currently is does give you an introduction to the game still. After you have defeated your first behemoth, you are teleported to Ramsgate, the only player hub of the game so far, which contains an isolated and usually random gathering of people. At Ramsgate you can basically do all the preparation for a mission, invite people, craft stuff, get quests, open loot, customize your gear and such. From here you do more missions, do the main quest lines, and rinse repeat. The premise of the game is very simple and pretty straightforward. The further you progress, the more challenging the content becomes. The better gear you get, and the more complex the tactics for killing behemoths become. And this is generally the entire game explained in terms of progression. Now just by how this sounds, you might assume that the game is a grind fest and not that fun, but while the game is quite grindy in some aspects, fighting the behemoths is actually immensely fun, especially with friends. So let's move on and talk about the combat, which is most certainly the highlight of the game. Now the controls for the combat are in fact pretty damn simple. Moving, dodging, jumping and basic attacks are all easy to use and come with a fairly standard keyboard layout that feels familiar to any action combat game. The combo system adds a little more flair to the entire thing, with set combos for each weapon as well as a few hidden combos as well. For example, the chain whip has a free pull to a target and the hammer has a full explosive ammo shot that isn't listed in the control window. While the controls are not complex, utilising them efficiently does take some mastering, especially in regards to the axe, which is one of the more higher skilled damage weapons in the game, but also one of the hardest skills to actually currently use and apply its damage with. So the combat for this game is very much an easy to learn but take a long time to master approach, which is perfect for this style of game. It's important to note that the mastery of combat does not just rely on the ability of your character, you must learn, adapt to, and become proficient in your understanding of enemy behemoths. There are no choreographed attacks with huge AoE zones that are shown to you, but you must look at the behemoth itself to know what it's going to do. The difference of a behemoth lowering its head to the ground or being lowered but slightly to the left is a big difference on what it's going to do next, which is very evident in fights like Pangar's. Overall, the combat system and the way it interacts with the behemoths is great in my opinion. There is still a lot of room for improvement, but it's a great initial start for a game that's in alpha. Crafting in the game is pretty generic. You get the items, you click on a button, boom, you crafted it. Get more items, click on the button, boom, you upgraded it. Extremely simple. The only complex and interesting side to crafting really is how you actually obtain some of the craftable parts. Behemoths come with parts that can be broken or damaged, and to get the drops you need to break or damage those parts. There is also an element of chance here too, and some parts of the mobs are harder to break than others due to their movesets. In terms of gear, most gear you have a lot of various options, and using the correct gear on the correct bosses much later in game is important. Gear also comes with an aspect system, which by wearing the same gear with the same aspect will basically give you additional effects, such as the ferocious aspect, which provides you with a very awesome shield bar. This means it's not only worthwhile farming multiple sets later on and especially towards the end game, but you need to consider what equipment to use for each behemoth before you begin farming them for drops. That pretty much sums up the crafting and gear aspects, as there's nothing overly complex about it currently. I'm hoping during the process of the alpha they actually add more content to crafting to make it a little bit more interesting. Dauntless's cartoonish art style is something that seems to be in flavour this year, with both Rend and Fortnite taking similar directions. Dauntless's art style isn't heavily cartoonish and retains some sense of realism to a lesser degree, no over-the-top out-of-place proportions, and visually represents a nice atmosphere while out hunting. Still, I personally feel they may have been better off going with a more photorealistic direction with the game. Bosses like Hellion, Shroud, Charog would look so much damn more intimidating and scary, making you feel like you were truly hunting some epic beasties. Instead, they just look too damn colourful to be something to be feared, and I find that to be quite a shame. Still, the game is pleasant to look at and definitely well optimised as it runs decent FPS on my 5-year-old PC. In terms of the UI, the current one looks fine, though I do feel like it could become more PC friendly. Currently, it has a slight console game UI feeling to it. It's not a big deal though, really, and it's clearly stated in several places that the UI and various sections are still in fact a work in progress. The overall design of it though I like, and it's quite minimalist and clean. The ambient sounds in-game are great. You can hear the wildlife chirping away in the forests, the sense of cold crisp air whooshing past your face in the snow environments, and generally no complaints on those things here. It's very well done. The music scores which are currently present in-game also are really nice. I especially like the music and sound effects from the Hellion and Shroud fights. It really suited those bosses. My only complaint about the music in any sense is the repetition, due to some fights lasting 20 to 30 minutes. Having the same track loop around for that duration can get a little tiresome. If I were to make a suggestion to improve this, I'd like to see the tempo of the music changed depending on how well the boss is doing, as well as a larger variety of music and possibly a unique theme for every behemoth type, as well as variations in the music itself depending on how the battle is going. So yeah, I think the music's great, but expanding the variety to cut down on the same tracks looping over and over would be awesome. So what kind of impression has Dauntless left on me currently? I find the game to be extremely simple, and that's not a bad thing in Dauntless's case. I've actually enjoyed all the time I've invested so far into it, and it does have some replayability to it. I think the game is extremely well put together, despite a few bugs and glitches that are still present, but that's to be expected for an alpha game. Most of the behemoth fights are extremely enjoyable. They are pretty similar early on and progress well with a lot of new mechanics being slowly added, which you need to adapt to. The overall pacing of the game is pretty decent, and well, the game's definitely one I'm glad to have in my collection now, and can't wait to see what they add. Currently, my biggest gripe with the game is simply that there isn't any form of additional content aside from hunting the behemoths and gathering and crafting stuff to hunt behemoths, which isn't separated in any way because you kind of do all that stuff at the same time. The game is slightly niche, but still enjoyable enough for any action RPG fan to get stuck into. I find the game's community to be quite friendly and helpful. There's a little bit of elitism and gear score EPing thrown around here and there, but overall people are willing to focus up and slap some behemoths in the face. And most people I've met in game and talked with and played with have been pretty awesome so far. But the big question is it worth buying right now? Well, I personally say yes, it is. However, there are a couple of things to bear in mind before you buy. One thing is that the developers, while stating they don't intend to wipe the game anytime soon, won't openly commit to not wiping it either. This leaves a little uncertainty if they will wipe the game or not multiple times during the alpha and beta phases, and they have instead tried to go down the route with the intention of trying to appease players who are both for and against the future potential wipes. Honestly, I feel it would have been just best to say they will do the wipes and confirm them before the release, as it just makes sense. And this also removes any sense of uncertainty. Ultimately, it comes down to the fact if you mind your progress being wiped or not. I personally don't mind starting from scratch over and over for testing, while some of you might feel it's not worth investing your time just yet as there will be potential wipes. The second thing to keep in mind is, well, just the lack of content. Most of the content for now will be fighting a decent selection of behemoths and grinding out their gear. I've most likely sunk a good 100 hours into this game within a week, and I'm pretty close to maxing out all the content currently on offer within this time period. So basically, to wrap all of this up, if you don't mind dropping the cash for the game at the moment despite the limited content on offer and the potential wipes that may or may not occur, then buy it. If you'd rather wait until the game is more fleshed out, has more content on offer and a lower price, just buy it later down the road. I'm pretty happy with what I got out of the game, and I know there's going to be more content in the future as well, and the game is definitely one to pick up at some point, and it's definitely something to keep you busy until Monster Hunter World arrives on our shores. Well, that ends my first impression of Dauntless, and if you enjoyed it or found it useful, don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment below, and as always, thanks for watching.